Wonderful. Warm greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to session 4 of the UN DESA Global Policy Dialogues for Climate Action, Financing Global Climate Action and Promoting Digital Solutions. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ariel Alexevich, and I'm a Sustainable Development Officer with the United Nations Department of Economic Affairs. We have a great 90-minute program ahead with many wonderful speakers who will discuss the latest in climate finance and digital solutions to the climate challenge. But first, a few logistical notes. Please note that English captions are available here in the Zoom by clicking on the captioning icon at the bottom of the screen. Live captions are also available in the 6 official languages of the UN: Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, and Spanish. These can be accessed on a separate website, bit.ly/captions30June. I will place this link in the chat in just a moment. There is a drop-down menu on that website for selecting your language. This event will be archived on the UN DESA Facebook page at facebook.com/joinundesa. So if you want to rewatch it, you can do so there immediately after our event is finished. Also, we welcome your questions during this event. If you have joined us in Zoom, you can post questions using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If you're with us on Facebook, you can post a question right in the chat. Our time is short, but we will attempt to address as many as we can. A note to panelists and speakers to please keep their cameras off and microphones on mute, except when you are speaking. All right, with that, I am pleased to introduce our opening speaker to help set the stage for our discussions today. We are very happy to have with us Mr. Selwyn Hart, Special Advisor to the UN Secretary General on Climate Action and Assistant Secretary General for the Climate Action Team. Thank you for being here, sir, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and good morning to you, and good morning to our colleagues. First, let me thank Mr. Liu, Undersecretary General for DESA, my colleague and friend, for extending this kind invitation to me. Colleagues, as the world enters the second year of the COVID-19 pandemic, the contrast between the situation in the developed world and that in the developing world could not be greater. Developed countries have poured trillions of dollars into their recovery packages. Indeed, in advanced economies, fiscal packages as a percentage of GDP have reached 27.7%. But the story is quite different in the developing world. For instance, the fiscal packages as a percentage of GDP in least developed countries is a mere 1.8%. Developing countries are faced with particularly high debt service levels and reduced fiscal space, reduced opportunities to raise taxes domestically as they continue to battle the economic and social consequences of the pandemic. And in many instances, like the tourism-dependent countries, these industries have come and these sectors are not producing revenue at usual levels. For example, in all Latin American and Caribbean countries, without exception, this fiscal situation has deteriorated and debt levels have increased, in many instances reaching record levels. It is expected that the indebtedness of countries in the LAC region will rise from 68.9% to 79.3% of GDP on a regional level, making the Latin American and Caribbean region the most indebted region in the world, and the region with the highest external debt service relative to exports of goods and services at 57%. This means that countries will not be able to make the necessary investments to pursue and meet the sustainable development goals or even the goals of the Paris Agreement. The region, however, this recovery has created and presents a once-in-a-generation opportunity, really, for us to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement and also pursue vigorously the sustainable development goals. But it will require significant and sustained and predictable support to the developing world. This is paramount. This must really be the objective of all of our efforts as countries, as the world seeks to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Not only do we need to enable developing countries to transition to a low carbon, clean energy future, but we urgently need to support them to build resilient economies and societies and adapt to the worsening impacts of climate change, impacts that they will not be able to escape. We have to get this right, or we risk setting back progress. This could be, if we don't get this right, this could be the beginning of yet another lost decade or decades for many developing countries. And this is why the Secretary General continues to pursue three important priorities as we head towards COP26 in Glasgow. Firstly, keeping 1.5 degrees within reach is an absolute priority. What does keeping 1.5 degrees or meeting that goal of the Paris Agreement means? It means preventing the worst impacts of climate change. At 1.2 degrees of warming at present, we're seeing unprecedented climate impacts all over the world. In fact, as we speak, we're seeing record temperatures in Canada, the Arctic region, the Northwest United States, and the northern regions of many countries. So this is why he continues to call for all countries, companies, citizens, financial institutions to commit to net zero by 2050, and for countries to submit more ambitious nationally determined contributions ahead of the COP in Glasgow. The reality is that while we've seen this coalition committing to net zero grow from about 30% this time last year to 73%, we're still not there yet. A lot more needs to be done to raise our ambition and to reduce emissions in line with the 1.5 degree goals of the Paris Agreement. So while there might be a bit of good news on the mitigation front, as we head towards Glasgow, we remain very concerned over the lack of progress on finance and on adaptation and resilience. The Secretary General has been relentlessly calling on developed countries to deliver and surpass the $100 billion goal, which was agreed to over a decade ago, back in 2009. This is of the essence to restore trust and confidence in the multilateral climate process. We need all developed countries to do more, not only in terms of the quantity, and we've been very specific, or the SU has been very specific in calling for a collective commitment to at least double public bilateral climate finance commitments, but also in terms of the quality of climate finance. We are very concerned that in many instances, loans as opposed to grants have been offered and provided as climate finance. And in a recent report issued by an independent group of experts that was commissioned by the Secretary General, it was recommended that significant improvements in the quality and composition of climate finance is absolutely essential. For example, doubling of grants as part of the public climate finance commitments of the developed countries will be absolutely essential. Adaptation and resilience remains a priority for most in the developing world. These countries, the small island developing states, least developed countries, countries in the Latin American region and in Africa, these countries stand on the front lines of the climate crisis. Yet adaptation finance remains a mere 1/5 of total climate finance flows, 21%. While it is estimated that the current cost of adaptation to the developing world stands at about $70 billion a year. So there is this huge gap between current flows, 16.7 billion per year, and current adaptation costs, which stand at $70 billion a year. And UNEP estimates that the cost of adaptation to the developing world could rise to as much as $300 billion a year. So there has to be a sea change in support for adaptation finance. And this is why the Secretary General continues to call on all donors, as well as the multilateral development banks, to commit to provide at least 50% of their total climate finance support towards adaptation and resilience. There also needs to be a sea change in how developing countries are supported to access climate finance. LDCs and SIDS account for a mere 14 and 2% of total climate finance flows. There really needs to be a global effort to ensure that these vulnerable countries are given much greater access to climate finance as we move towards Glasgow and beyond. I would like to emphasize the role of the multilateral development banks. Their support to developing countries in the short term will either be to facilitate the urgent decisions they need to make to set them on a low carbon, climate resilient recovery, or entrench them in a high carbon, business as usual, fossil fuel intensive investment scenario with high stranded assets. So to the multilateral development banks, and I understand that some of you are on this call, our call to you is simple. Increase your climate finance and allocate at least 50% to adaptation, as I said earlier. You must align your portfolios, existing and future, to the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement at latest by 2024. And you need to make your Paris alignment methodologies public, so you can benefit from external input and course correct when needed. And be clear about how you support developing countries with a just transition away from coal, oil, and gas. Colleagues, to get the world back on its feet and to restore trust in multilateralism and cooperation among governments, and to recover in a way that is fair, sustainable, and inclusive, we simply need to deliver on climate finance for the developing world. And I count on all of you to echo this message, and I look forward to the stimulating discussion that I'm sure that will follow this morning. Thank you so much, colleagues.
Many thanks, ASG Hart, for those great introductory remarks. This will help inform our conversations today and really get us geared towards thinking about everything that we need to do before COP26, and also hoping that some of the keystone moments on the way there, the Sustainable Transport Conference and the UN High-Level Dialogue on Energy, can also serve as motivating points for investment in climate and the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you very much, Mr. Hart. We appreciate you being here. So now, please, let's get to our first panel discussion. This one will be on financing global climate action and promoting digital solutions. I'd like to introduce the moderator of the panel, Mr. Anthony Langet, a climate and environment reporter based in Kenya. Welcome, Anthony, and over to you. I will ask you to turn on your video now. Hi, good afternoon.
Thank you, Ariel, and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our first panel discussion. This one on financing climate action during a global pandemic. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and as I introduce you, please turn on your video. So our first panelist is Virender Dugal, the principal climate change specialist, the Asian Development Bank. We also have Ms. Shinaz Musa, the director of the Southern Africa Climate Finance Partnership at South North. Our third panelist is Ms. Shari Spiegel, the Chief Policy Analysis and Development Branch Financing for Sustainable Development Office at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, UN DESA. We also have Mr. Daniele Violetti, who is the Director, Means of Implementation at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Thank you all for being here. We have a lot of great speakers and only about 40 minutes to hear from them. So let's get right into it. I would encourage our speakers to keep their answers concise as possible so that we can cover as much ground as possible. First question is to Mr. Daniele Violetti, and it's about taking stock of the global picture of climate change finances as it stands. From your seat at the UNFCCC, Daniele, where are we? Where do we need to be? And how has COVID-19 thrown a wrench into the works in our best efforts at climate finance?
Thank you, and good day to all of you, and thanks to DESA for inviting us to be part of this very nice event panel. So, but let me first start by immediately echoing Selvin just asked us the key aspects of the situation where we are and the imperative we are facing. Fundamentally, the climate crisis did not disappear at all because of COVID-19. And it remains our greatest long-term threat. So in spite of all this happening in terms of COVID, which is of course very critical, at the same time, the crisis relating to the climate is with us and will remain with us for a long time. So the need for a coordinated global recovery from COVID that follows the Paris Agreement and the UN 2030 agenda, tackling climate change in a just, logical manner. It's really what we need so that we are bringing back the world towards the goals of being safe, healthy, and sustainable, and more important, more equitable for all. So all these key imperatives, I think, have to be repeated as much as we can to not forget why we are all working together toward this. Now, looking at climate finance in particular, and whether the COVID-19 has put climate finance at risk or it presented opportunity, let me just say a few points here. I mean, the official numbers for climate finance in 2020 have yet to be reported. But we know already how much COVID-19 has played strain on public finance balance sheets and altered much private sector activity. So it is difficult now to envisage how the world climate finance law, in all its forms, sources, and channels, would be immune from such impacts. Prior to COVID-19, the overall trend was of increasing climate finance, about 13% from the biennium 15-16 to the 17-19. And this is based on the official reporting data that we receive here from developed countries here in FCCC. But of course, as been said already, much more is still needed, particularly in the form of grant-based finance, and particularly for adaptation. These are the critical aspects that are to be part of now of the response to the situation we are facing. So climate finance flows can be not only as a function of the supply side dynamics of pledges, commitments, but also from demand side, viewing having projects and activities ready to be financed in developing countries. So the pandemic has potentially and understandably, I would say, diverted the government attention away from working on the project pipelines and development plans that could avail climate finance. And of course, they are battling a severe public health crisis on top of public finance crisis, due to the lack of economic activity and the reduction in tax and trade revenues. This is the reality. But still, the opportunity is there, potentially even more than before, that in helping countries recover from the pandemic, more leapfrogging onto sustainable development pathways can occur, and climate finance resources need to be put at use in this specific way. So that's the opportunity there. So we have seen also very heartening signals from updated nationally determined contribution that came in even during the pandemic persisted in such countries. And this is a response to the opportunity as well. True is that whatever we have seen now, it's not enough to meet the goal of the policy. So the overall concept of more ambition, and more ambition is not only for the purpose of mitigation, of course, but more ambition in adaptation, more ambition in means of implementation. So the support, being it finance, being it technology, being capacity building, that needs to accompany this process. So other interesting scenario, positive scenario that we've seen in the financial mechanism of climate finance that we put in place to continue to function and then take this opportunity on. And I'm sure we will hear more on this. Just an example from the data from the Green Climate Fund that they've been able to meet the disbursement rate goals during the crisis, and they're on track of exceeding these. So in broad terms, we do recognize that some countries have reduced their bilateral development aid budgets. That's a reality. But climate finance commitment have been generally ring-fenced or even strengthened. With the, we see recent announcements made in support of the adaptation fund, the development fund, new pledges have been come to the surface. So it is really a matter of channeling and take advantage of this opportunity and these new financial flows that are making their way through the recovery of the pandemic and use them for the purpose of addressing climate, Paris Agreement, and SDGs. I can stop here now. First, and then I can come back on other more specific topics. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Violetti, for your overview and opinion on this, which is really insightful in our discussion on climate finance. So it is important also that as we consider climate finance, consider it alongside sustainable development. And I'd like to ask Shari, what you're seeing in the data related to financing for sustainable development from where you are.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you all for being here. And it's a pleasure to be part of this panel. So let me tell you a little bit first about what we do. So I work in DESA, and I lead what's called on the working level, the Interagency Task Force on Financing for Development, which brings together the entire UN system, along with the IMF, World Bank, WTO, and others, to bring together all of our work on financing for sustainable development. Every year we publish the Financing for Sustainable Development report, which brings together analysis from all of these more than 60 international institutions. We cover the entire range of different financing areas. So we cover domestic resource mobilization, private finance, aid, and then we also cover development cooperation, but we also cover the big systemic issues, including debt issues and the stability of the international financial system. And all of these are very linked up with climate. So climate impacts every single one of the areas that we've been covering, as did the COVID crisis. So I think ASG Hart very well described some of the challenges that have been coming up due to COVID. They have really set back financing for sustainable development and financing for climate action as well. There's, as you know, there's been a sharp contraction in GDP of almost 3.5%, 3.6% in 2020. There's a rebound expected in 2021, but it's not even across the world. So some countries, developed countries, are doing better, and other developing countries are still under enormous pressures. There was enormous fiscal pressure. At the same time, in terms of financing issues, countries had enormous fiscal needs, health needs first and foremost, but also issues of employment and just in general social protection of the population, at the same time that tax receipts went down. So it really was an enormous strain on fiscal balances and the ability to finance development and finance sustainable development and climate action. And we saw this in a drop in investment. So foreign direct investment fell almost 40%, around 38%. And fixed capital formation, a measure of investment, also fell pretty dramatically. Now, I would say that at the same time, so because of this fall, we saw countries putting in policies together. We know that there were big recovery packages, as ASG Hart said, at least in developed countries that could afford them. But at the same time, countries also put in place new business measures to try to stimulate investment. And one of the problems we saw was that some of the money went to fossil fuel industries, as well as some of the deregulation of environmental regulations that go against climate and environmental support. So some of the responses have actually been, I think that in 16 G20 countries, there was net negative environmental impact. So we really see that there's been a really negative impact from the pandemic on financing for development and financing for sustainable development in particular, as well as climate action. On the positive side, despite the fall in investments in the tech sector did not fall as much. And I think that that's one of the opportunities as we move forward. In general, as we've all been saying, the crisis does present an opportunity to reboot and refocus and rebuild. And the first thing is the importance of investments in infrastructure, green assets, green technology, and technology more generally to address climate, which will also spur growth, spur recovery, and if done in the right way, can reduce inequalities. We know that some countries, the EU had the green recovery package, though many national recovery plans are missing some of those targets for climate, but these types of things can help spur growth at the same time as addressing the climate crisis. The crisis is also as addressing the pandemic and the climate crisis. The crisis has really underscored the importance of risk management and understanding risk and understanding the impact of thinking about how do you prepare better for risks, which again brings in climate risks as well as health risks and other risks. Another opportunity is in the private sector. We will hopefully talk about this more in the second round. There has been enormous movement, I think, in terms of reporting and the private sector understanding climate risks and beginning to incorporate those climate risks into their planning processes. That is different, however, from thinking about the externalities of their behavior on climate. So they're internalizing more and more the risks to their own profitability, but they're not yet necessarily thinking about the impacts of their behavior on climate and other sustainable development goals. So that's something I think that an opportunity to build on the momentum that exists in terms of corporate reporting and to try to better align private behavior with sustainable development. Finally, I would just say that as ASG Hart said, there's really a need for international support for the poorest countries. And one thing to really think about is that the crisis has also exacerbated debt problems in many developing countries. So countries that are fiscally constrained also have a risk and an increased risk of a debt crisis. And this there are enormous linkages between thinking about debt and climate that we can talk about in the rest of the session. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shari, for your insight on that. I know there is a lot to speak about, especially with regards to sustainable development and how COVID-19 has exacerbated that, and also the funding on climate finance. So maybe it would be it's a good time to also listen to how this has affected the opinions or what other panelists have to say, especially we're going to listen to Shahniz, who's going to speak to us on the challenges they are seeing from their regional perspectives from the South-North. Welcome, Shahniz.
Thank you, Anthony. And I'm feeling quite privileged to be on this panel. So yeah, so thank you to the organizers for inviting me to be part of this. So from my side, just to give some background, I'm a director at an organization called South-North. We're based at the tip of Africa in Cape Town. And most of the work we do is in developing countries in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And the space we occupy is predominantly around knowledge brokering for climate action. What I'd really like to talk you through now is just some general observations we've had through our work over the last, 16 months during the COVID period. So when COVID happened, we decided to use some of our funding to actually look at how how communities are responding to the crisis. And our thinking was that the way they're responding and the financing mechanisms, et cetera, they're using would be the same way they will respond to a climate emergency. Through this, we found that there were positive and negative aspects. And so I'm going to talk you through the positive first, because I feel it's always good to start with the positive. What we found was that the poor and most vulnerable communities want to be part of the decisions and interventions aimed at addressing their challenges. So I just want us to think that all these, even though what I'm talking to is the response to the COVID crisis, to think of it as a response to a climate emergency. They want to contribute to their own socioeconomic upliftment and don't want to be dependent on handouts. And I think that's really important for donors and financiers to be aware of. Individuals and communities often demonstrated the ability to share assets, resources, information, skills, cost, and burdens. So sharing is a key survival strategy at the grassroots level, especially when a crisis arises. Social capital and social support structures within informal settlements are very important means of responding to a crisis situation, given the lack of formal structures and institutions. The pandemic forced many of those who worked in the informal sector to explore alternative livelihoods, but there were persistent barriers, such as access to finance and training. And often the NGOs, CBOs, and CSOs, as well as individual leaders, played a pivotal role in ensuring that the basic needs of vulnerable and poor communities were addressed during the crisis and beyond. So just a reminder to think of all this in terms of the climate emergency. Some of the negative aspects which we observed was that many of the vulnerable and poor, they live below the poverty line without basic human rights and access to basic services. And this significantly impedes the ability to respond to any crisis and to build resilience. Interventions of government are often inadequate, fragmented, and poorly coordinated. There's often corruption and unscrupulous practices by individuals and private sector or businesses, which increases the burden on those already suffering. What became apparent was that loan sharks and businesses exploited the impact of COVID-19 for personal gain. And many of the urban poor are migrants with specific vulnerabilities in crisis situations. I think what I'd like to end off with is some recommendations from us, because I think there's a lot of deep learning here. and a lot to reflect on that we can take into the discussions. So what we'd like to recommend is that there is empowering and supporting of communities to build their own resilience. And this is resilience to climate, but just to generally build resilience and to lead to their own economic upliftment. Communities are very able to leverage their own asset base and to ensure sustainability. We also want to recommend that their support and co-fund should exist, and that there's innovative microfinancing mechanisms or similar vehicles to expand the reach and scale of relevant needs-driven finance for community-based resilience, to adopt a multi-pronged approach to empowerment of local communities. So, for example, access to finance combined with appropriate and sustained training and capacity development and policy support, that there's collaboration and coordination with government programs is essential to create enabling environments to access finance and unlock small business opportunities. Also, there needs to be an improvement in the delivery of basic services to informal communities and to assist them. Then, and this is more for the donor community, is that donors should aggregate smaller projects and they should co-fund larger projects to create scale instead of working in silos. And then for additional financing resources, there's leverage and to leverage the private sector to support the incubation of entrepreneurs and SMMEs to build resilience, building capacity and skills needed, and then also to support the access of relevant business infrastructure and resources. Yeah, so I think that's it from me. So what I've given you are some of the pros and some of the cons, and then also some of the recommendations from the work that we've been looking at over the last year. And I think there's quite a bit to think through there. So back to you, Anthony. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shanice, for that complete perspective from South North. And now we are going to hear from Virender from the Asian Development Bank. And the question again is speak on the challenges you're seeing from the perspective of the region and from where you are from. So over to you, Virender. And let's remember to keep it concise because of time. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. First of all, my sincere thanks and gratitude to the organizers for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here joining this panel. I represent the Asian Development Bank, which is operating in the region Asia and the Pacific. Talking in the context of the discussion that has been going on this topic, let me quickly join the conversation and inform you that at ADB, we support our developing member countries in the region tackle climate change, build climate and disaster resilience, and enhance environmental sustainability. At ADB, climate change agenda is very important to us. And under our long-term strategy 2030, ADB is targeting to deliver $80 billion of cumulative climate finance from its own financial resources between 2019 and 2030. Moreover, we will also ensure that at least 75% of our projects will address climate change, mitigation, and adaptation by 2030. That's quite an ambitious target moving forward in this agenda, especially more aligned to the Paris Agreement. We are also helping our developing member countries to achieve and even increase their Paris Agreement commitments while charting a fair and equitable path to net zero. We are doing so through various programs, let me share, focusing on the NDCs, carbon pricing, climate finance, and development of sound and ambitious long-term national strategies. We are also aiming to finalize our new energy policy before COP26, which is also quite aligned to the goals of the Paris Agreement. So to answer the question Anthony has raised, how does COVID-19 crisis has put climate finance at risk? Let me share my quick thoughts onto this one. That the
it is a well-recognized fact that the COVID-19 pandemic has created an unprecedented economic and health crisis that has pushed many economies into fiscal deficit and increased public debt. And policymakers, especially in our region, continue to grapple with often conflicting, competing interests of managing health risk on one side and also the limiting economic damages on the other. So in this context, pursuing business as usual or picking up the low-hanging fruits, as we call them, could be very tempting for the country, especially the policymakers who are dealing with this very difficult situation. So in this context, the distraction from the NDC pathways is quite natural to happen. So in this context, any countries can lack focus on a green, inclusive, and resilient recovery could be putting climate action at risk, and therefore could be that may have some negative repercussions for the climate finance that we see in the region. But ADB has been very, very active in this space. I can tell you, like I mentioned about the targets, and I'm very proud to share that in 2020, despite a very challenging circumstance, we committed $4.3 billion of climate finance, which is showing progress in this region and under very challenging circumstances. So I'll stop here. We'll be happy to take any further question and join any discussion that may go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Virender, for keeping time and for that concise response. So next, maybe it would be good to hear from the panelists, and we may start with Daniele on some good projects, some programs that are leading the way to jumpstarting investments in climate mitigation and adaptation efforts. What programs, what projects do you come to mind when you hear about the right thing that is being done to jumpstart climate mitigation and adaptation? Over to you, Daniel.
Thank you. Well, really briefly, I would like to touch base to one project that we are implementing here at the Climate Change Secretary, which is a result of a specific mandate we received by our conference of the party, our COP, which is called Needs-Based Finance Project. So this project, as we are implementing it in almost all developing regions in more than 100 countries. And really the lessons we are learning from this, I think, are important to be shared with this group as well, because they can, are good examples of what are the implications of these activities and what developing countries are asking us to do. So fundamentally, we are helping developing countries in developing strategies and implementation plans towards achieving a larger portion of the climate finance. And one of the goals we are aiming at is really limiting the complexity of the whole process and increase in-country capacity to prepare projects first and to provide assistance. Then the other goal is to scale up finance with innovative approaches and incentives, so attracting also the private sector and responding to key themes like gender and poor communities, while we are addressing mainly adaptation and loss of damage to climate change. Then looking further, this helps in placing the climate finance expertise within government to gain access to climate finance funds and facilities, and therefore additionally attract private finance. Also enhancing intra and inter coordination of ministries in those countries and helping in supporting the definition of policies for climate finance, really targeting the most urgent needs. Then what we are doing there is increasing collaboration on transboundary approaches, payment for ecosystem services, emission trading, debt swaps, all on the basis of the country delivery request we are seeing. And then helping in diversify climate finance instruments. looking to highly concessional funds, grants, equity, and guarantees, and both carbon finance remains. So that, and also later on, facilitate the monitoring and tracking of efficiency impacts and looking at a longer term predictability of finance and finance flows within and out the country. So all these are just to share some examples. As I said, more than 100 countries we are working on with them, supporting them, and these are some of the key elements that we are receiving as helping them move forward in climate finance. So let's share with you, and happy to provide all information are also on our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Daniele. We will now move to getting questions from our audiences, and I'll be asking those to the panelists, and anyone who feels like they can tackle the question is welcome to get onto it. So the first question that we are going to address is from Sydney Clouston, who is reaching us via Facebook, and is asking, how about the investment incentives, and that are clean development mechanisms realistic? He's asking about whether the investment, he's asking about investment incentives and whether clean development mechanisms are realistic. So anyone from the panel is welcome to take that question. I think there are two parts to it, but whichever is whichever question is that you feel you can take is open to anyone at the panel. Welcome.
Maybe I can give a first go, and then of course I'll stop talking. But I mean, in general, I refer to carbon finance, and indeed these, and looking back in history of the climate change process, and when we if the reference is to the CDM under the Kyoto Protocol was the type of activity referred to in the question, it had a major impact in making countries aware and ready to, tackle climate change through these type of projects. So this, even if the distribution of this project was really not even across the globe, and there are big issues there, but I mean, I think the lessons learned are very important, and then provided opportunities for integrating this type of project in policies at the country level, building the capacity of expertise at the country level. So these are, in my view, important components for supplementing other activities as well in the context of implementation of the Convention and the Paris Agreement. Now, the definition of the future of carbon market within the Paris Agreement depends, of course, and we are looking to COP26 in Glasgow for the finalization of the Article 6 negotiation related to carbon markets for the future. So once that is in place, this will provide an important opportunity further in supporting and engaging developing countries and the private sector in achieving those. Thank you.
Hi, Viranda, you have something to add on that question? Yeah, welcome.
Yeah, the clean development mechanism under the Kyoto Protocol, it was quite successful as a mechanism for mobilizing international carbon finance, which was aimed to provide additional financial resources for project developers who were implementing technologies that they would not have done otherwise. So it was a good mechanism. It is still a good mechanism that can help project developers overcome some of the major financial barriers in implementing those projects. So what we have learned, I mean, there are many successful examples in countries. For example, I can say the wind industry, wind power industry in India and China, which are good examples of how international financial flows through CDM kind of help establishment of industries or even contributed to the development of certain sectors. So, and from the experience, and ADB has been quite active in this space, and we have managed certain carbon funds, and we have been able to build a good portfolio of projects which are using CDM. But what we have learned from our experience is that some of the projects, if they are designed properly, they not only reduce GHG emissions, but they also bring about a host of co-benefits for the local communities and beyond, and that can contribute to SDGs. So moving forward, under the Paris Agreement, we are looking towards the development of new market mechanisms under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which again are likely to be the mechanisms through which the project developers, the countries, can access international carbon finance to overcome some of the financial barriers that can act as incentives for those countries. So this is something very interesting, and this should be looked upon. And carbon finance, I must reiterate, and before I finish, makes a very important component of the overall climate finance architecture and should be looked at very seriously. Thank you. Back to you, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Virender, and all the panelists who have made this discussion a success, and with their experience and insights into the various topics that we have raised. I know we would have had a lot to speak about, but time has not been on our side. But yeah, carbon financing is the best way to finish this discussion. So many thanks to you, dear panelists, and all the best. You may now turn off your cameras. Thank you. Now, let's shift our focus to digital solutions to the climate challenge. I have the honor now to introduce our keynote speaker, Ms. Olga Algeirova, the Executive Secretary for the UN Economic Commission for Europe, to share her remarks.
Good afternoon, dear Mr. Liu, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's really my pleasure to join you today in this important and timely initiative. As we have heard from Selvin, finance is critical to address the climate emergency. We need to raise resources to make the necessary transformations happen. And we also need to ensure that we get the best return possible for these resources. This double dimension, resource mobilization and creation of incentives, puts finance at the center of the policy efforts on climate change. Please let me stress an aspect which I believe is particularly important: the need to understand and tackle the distributional effects of decarbonization. This is not only fair, but imperative to avoid resistance to the necessary transformations. Addressing climate change is a common shared goal which benefits all, but not all have the same capacity to act or will share equally the cost of the transition. In the presence of an indivisible benefit, but unequal capacities and burdens, finance is necessary to overcome the obstacles to action. And as we heard, in addition, the COVID-19 pandemic, which has created pressing demands on public resources and left a legacy of higher debts and deficits, has reduced the capacity to act for many middle and low income countries. In this adverse context, it is important that climate finance does not create additional debt burdens. We need to find imaginative solutions and instruments to ensure that appropriate financing is available. So how can we facilitate the flow of finance for climate action? Please allow me to focus on 3 issues in my intervention. First, we need to exploit the existence of co-benefits for climate mitigation initiatives in addition to the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. The most obvious co-benefit is the reduction of air pollution from emissions of fossil fuels, and the accompanying positive health and environmental consequences. And this benefit is far from negligible. The estimated health impact of air pollution is equivalent to more than 10% of GDP in almost half of the countries in the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe region, what are 56 countries. While great progress has been achieved over the last decades under our Air Convention, much work remains to be done. In addition, there are many other areas, including resource efficiency, economic security, sustainability of ecosystems, or increased economic dynamism, where climate mitigation has a positive impact. Some of these co-benefits have a direct financial translation. For instance, savings from reduced fuel use, while others like health or the preservation of biodiversity don't have an immediate monetary value, but they are significant. The payoffs and the time profile of particular projects change once these co-benefits are taken into account, which raises new financing possibilities. Climate mitigation policy can be considered as part of larger strategies for low carbon development, where co-benefits play an important role in the motivation for action. For instance, the shift to a circular economy will contribute to climate change mitigation, but also bring additional benefits in terms of increased competitiveness and economic resilience. And EC is supporting its member states to increase circularity. We want to achieve double-digit circularity in the region by developing standards and facilitating cooperation. Second, financing the revamping and upgrading of infrastructure remains critical. Our decisions today regarding infrastructure will shape energy and resources demand for years to come. It is therefore essential that the right incentives and resources are deployed to support efficient infrastructures that contribute to the energy transition rather than locking in wasteful patterns of resource use. ECC is strongly engaged in the development of standards for energy efficient buildings, for instance. It also supports its members on the identification of solutions to finance the transition to sustainable cities, which requires meeting multiple infrastructure needs. By harnessing information technologies, smart cities can make a great contribution to reduce environmental pressures. And third, the importance of clear and transparent information to support the development of financial instruments to address climate change. Inflows into green bonds and other sustainability assets continue to increase rapidly, and Europe is leading the way. However, this has been accompanied by growing concerns on greenwashing, which needs to be addressed to provide a solid foundation to these instruments. And of course, digital solutions can be deployed to overcome information gathering and verification problems. EC, for example, is engaged in the use of blockchain technologies to provide traceability in supply chains in the garment industry. So thank you for your attention and look forward to the discussion. Back to you, Anthony.
Many thanks, Ms. Secretary, for your insight. We are grateful for that. I'd now like to welcome our guests for the second discussion on scaling up digital solutions for mitigating climate change. I invite them to now turn on their cameras. Yeah, so first we have Kwame Ababio, the Senior Program Officer for Advisory Services in the African Union Development Agency. We have Suzanne Baker, the Associate Director, Climate, Environment and Sustainability in Tech UK. We also have Mr. Josiah Hester, the Assistant Professor at Northwestern University and Director of the Ka Momoa Ubiquitous and Mobile Computing Lab, working toward a sustainable future for computing informed by native Hawaiian knowledge. We also have Mr. Faisal Kazim, the Senior Project Manager, Dubai Future Foundation. Thank you all for being here. And again, I would encourage our speakers to keep their answers concise as much as possible so that we can cover as much ground as possible. Yeah, since we've learned that 40 minutes is quite a short time, we're going to get right into it. And my first question, you all come from different areas of the world and are working every day on a wide range of digital projects. First, I'd like to start by asking you to share with us the innovative applications of digital knowledge and digital technology that you are working on or seeing work in your various parts of where you come from. And I know we could talk for hours about those, but we'll try to keep it as brief as possible. So to Suzanne, let's start with what the UK is doing. I know you have some experience with digital tech in supporting green financing. Maybe you could start us off with that.
Yeah, so hello everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me along for this interesting discussion today. I'm very honoured to be with you. So we are seeing digital technologies being deployed increasingly to help address the climate crisis. In fact, actually as sectors start to mature their sector transition plans, I think it's without exception, we're seeing a digital component in all of that. So in the finance sector, for example, we are seeing digital as being absolutely vital in helping to share information across borders to investors and financiers so they can assess dynamically ESG reporting criteria and help to ensure that they've got the data and insights they need to ensure that they are investing their money in the right way. Another key area for us in the UK is actually around energy. As we're moving more to distributed renewable energy away from our traditional carbon intensive energy sources, we're seeing digital as really important in helping to manage the fluctuating supply and creating a demand responsive system so that we can manage energy use and encourage people to use energy when there is more low carbon electrons on the grid and discourage them from using it when carbon intensive electrons are on the grid. We've recently launched in the UK an energy digitalisation task force, which is starting to think through the governance structure that sits behind that. And some of the technologies that are being explored include digital twin, AI, 5G and edge computing, to name but a few. The other area that we're very active in is in the EV transition. So for example, we need to ensure that charging infrastructure can talk to one another so that consumers, when they charge up their EV vehicles, can use any charging infrastructure regardless of who put it there. And that requires a data and digital infrastructure that sits behind it. And we're also seeing applications being deployed to support the circular economy as well. So digital technologies like IoT and blockchain being used to track assets, materials through the value chain. So we can understand where carbon is arising, pinpoint and work with suppliers through the supply chain, and actually understand the health of assets and products through their life so we can repair and maintain those products before they fail, thereby reducing their carbon impact over their life cycle. So there's just a few examples, but yeah, lots going on. Thank you very much, Suzanne. So over to you, Faisal. And I know that Dubai is one of the smartest cities in the world. And what is it that you are up to in Dubai? What are you working on?
Thank you very much. Maybe just a quick introduction first. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this important discussion. Climate change is a global challenge, so I'm glad to have the opportunity to provide our perspective from this part of the world. I'm representing Dubai Future Foundation, which is a Dubai government organization mandated to help make Dubai a leading city of the future. And climate change concerns the future of our planet, so it's an important area of focus for us. And the research that I'm leading includes the local hydrogen economy as well as carbon capture technologies. So I think when it comes to applications of digital technology on mitigating climate change, in our opinion, artificial intelligence holds great potential. So some estimates claim that AI alone could help us reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 4% as early as 2030. But AI could be very broad. So it would be helpful to look at a specific example. So for example, with solar power, solar power costs have fallen globally by 82% between 2010 to 2019. And in our region, we have abundant sunshine. So it makes it an attractive location for solar power. Dubai has taken advantage of this opportunity by producing clean energy through our solar park, a 5 gigawatt solar park, which is being developed by the Dubai Electricity and Water Authority. And it's also achieving record low cost. So these are all very positive signs. But the problem with solar power is that it's intermittent in nature. So it's typically combined with more stable sources of energy, at least at present. So the goal would be to maximize solar power usage and minimize other sources in order to minimize emissions and the impact on climate change. So digital technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning will play a key role in identifying energy usage patterns in a city. So based on energy demand, weather, and so on, so that we can ensure that we only increase energy production from sources which are maybe harmful to the environment only when they're absolutely necessary. And ultimately, this will reduce the impact on environment and climate change. I realize, we don't have too much time. So, I mean, there's a lot of examples like applications of blockchain, for example, and so on. But I also wanted to emphasize, governments can lead the implementation of these projects while also including the private sector. So, for example, in Dubai, we do this through accelerator programs. The Dubai Future Accelerators, for example, which is a Dubai Future Foundation project, we connect government entities to entrepreneurs and innovators from around the world to solve challenges that are being faced by Dubai government. So similarly, a challenge can be proposed on reducing emissions, for example, in a certain sector, and this would then make that connection between entrepreneurs and innovators and government organizations, whether they're environmental organizations or energy producers. But these are just some of the examples from Dubai, but I want to leave some time for the other panelists as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Faisal. You bring in a very pertinent perspective there of the government and private sector working together to mitigate climate change using technology. Thank you. So we hear from Josiah on how the indigenous knowledge is being brought together with digital technology and in order to mitigate on climate change. Welcome, Josiah.
Yeah, thank you so much for being invited to this panel. It's really, really incredible, especially to hear everyone else's perspectives from around the world. So quickly about me, right? Because otherwise, none of this will make sense, right? So I'm a professor at Northwestern, and I lead a lab that builds tiny computing devices. So we talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning. We can think of that in very large scale, like large data center style. We can also think of it in the small. And I build devices that can be ubiquitously deployed, almost like fabric of computing across cities, across large environments, across habitats that can then give this kind of data infrastructure that then governments or citizens even, or journalists or activists can take this data and try and understand what's going on in the world and in the climate and amongst people. So this could be everything from understanding transportation patterns, traffic patterns in a city to wildlife migration and habitat migration across large scale land to smart agriculture and things like that. So our focus is, from this perspective, how do we make these types of technologies more sustainable? So how can we make computing sustainable in this future Internet of Things, so that instead of deploying 1 trillion devices that are all plugged in or have batteries, then those batteries have to be taken out and replaced. They won't get recycled because it's very difficult to recycle without burning them, basically. How can we instead take, just like we took renewable energy for large scale, put renewable energy in the small scale? So tiny solar panels, even soil powered or motion powered devices. So a Fitbit that charges itself up as you're running, right? Or a face mask that as you breathe on it, it also gathers your heart rate or something like that. So the technologies, I guess, and I should also say that my background is also as an indigenous person, so a native Hawaiian. Indigenous people have been doing sustainable infrastructure for many, maybe I could say millennium. And so I think some of these oral traditions and knowledge have been used and trickled down, and hopefully soon will be integrated and respected, along with kind of the let's call it scientific knowledge that many of us participate in to try and make a better world. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in those connections. Two things I'm very excited about and are kind of on this city scale monitoring. So we've been building soil powered sensors, right, that harvest energy from the microbial communities in soil itself. They have no batteries. And then they can do things like take a picture of a mongoose or some animal that goes across a habitat, which can be very useful for understanding migration of species across urban landscapes to reduce impact on humans and on the animals themselves, and also understand the effects of climate change as it moves habitats around. We've also looked at using these same battery-free sensors to understand water and water storage and green infrastructure. The other thing that I think is really interesting, besides these types of sensors, is personal health sensors that are, as I said, maybe powered by your movement, your motion, even molecules in your sweat that can then give you some insight on the effects even of climate change on yourself from a personal scale, such as air quality, heat. The Pacific Northwest in the US is burning up right now. And so being able to understand that impact from these kind of personal digital technologies is really interesting. So thank you, Anthony.
Thank you very much, Josiah, for your insights. Now we will hear from Kwame, who is a senior project officer at African Union and occupies a vantage point, and he is going to tell us about the projects that are across the continent that he is aware of that are helping mitigate climate change. Welcome, Kwame.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and good afternoon to everyone. Exactly, my name is Kwame Abebio. I'm Senior Program Officer in charge of advisory services at the African Union Development Agency, which is the development body of the African Union system. In fact, our mandate is similar to that of the UNDP within the UN system. And I'm thankful to be part of these discussions, which I believe is more relevant than ever, especially in light of the COVID situation and what is now referred to as the new normal, with digital technologies playing a front and central role in our daily lives. Understandably, the key question for all of us to ponder on is whether collectively we can turn this digital revolution as one of the major drivers for positive climate action. And I'll just give an example of one project that we're involved in because of the lack of time. So this was a project that we did as the African Union Development Agency under the Africa Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance. And it was to support the government of South Africa through the South African Weather Service in supporting farmers in using agro-meteorological information towards climate smart agriculture. So basically it was using digital solution which helped the farmers to better understand climate vulnerabilities through improved weather forecasts and also providing advisory services on climate smart agricultural practices. And this is supposed to help the farmers improve upon their access to weather-based adaptation inputs, as well as weather-based, index-based insurance. And of course, this has the potential of increasing productivity as a result of the dissemination of agricultural advice in real-time information also provided to farmers. One critical player in Africa's agricultural system is the role of the agricultural extension agents, because these are the direct interface between the policymakers as well as the local farmers. So the project supported the agricultural extension agents with training on the use of these agrometeorological information and explaining them to the farmers so that there was a reverse kind of feedback. The extension agents take the information to farmers and then also receive feedback from the farmers, which then improves upon the policy making process at the weather service station in South Africa. And as part of this training, this project, which was basically in the rural KwaZulu-Natal province in South Africa. And this is the province where most of the Zulus in South Africa are. And it's quite a traditional society. So there was also training for a number of the traditional leaders, because it was important for them to understand the concept of climate change. If I didn't live it, they might have a different interpretation of it. So it was very important for us to have that kind of discourse with traditional leaders for policymakers to understand from the perspective of local farmers, traditional council members, on how they see climate change, so that there's a very good grounds for exchange of information. So that was also done within the project. And very importantly also, this project was done mostly in the local language, so that nothing is lost in translation. But the farmers are better able to express themselves and what the situation is, so that it also helps the decision makers in looking for solutions to some of the problems that the local people are not able to solve themselves. So I think this is very, very important, that in the scheme of things, whenever we are doing projects around climate change, whether agriculture or whichever sector it is, local participation, having the local people front and center, leading from the front as part of this engagement is very, very critical. And we've had some very, very successful stories that have come out of this project. I think due to the challenges of time, I can't go any further. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kwame. So that's a good point to end with, about involving the local people and carrying out this climate change mitigation project. So from South Africa to Dubai to the UK and to even Hawaii in the US, we have seen various ways in which digital solutions are being used to mitigate climate change. My only question now is, how then does a government, does the academia or the private sector identify, finance, and even mentor these projects? The question is, how do we identify, finance, and mentor these projects? How does the academia, the government, and even the private sector find these projects and then mentor them? Maybe with that question, I'll direct to Faisal. Are you going to pick up that?
Sure. So I mean, the accelerators example was actually one way that governments can actually include the private sector, maybe even academia, but mostly the government and private sector to make this happen. In addition to that, when you talk about financing and digital technologies, so blockchain-based tokenization of green projects is another area to explore in the future. So, so individuals, it doesn't have to be large corporations, but even individuals themselves who are looking to make a change, to make a difference, will be able to either finance the operating expenses of let's say solar parks or similar projects, or maybe even the capital expenditure. So yeah, I mean, from my side, I think those are the two areas.
Thank you, Faisal. Because of time, we're going to rush through. So we're going to go to my next question, which is about how COVID-19 has created, whether it has created any challenges or opportunities, especially in this area of scaling up digital solutions against mitigating climate change. Susan, are you going to jump into that?
Yeah, well, I think it's been mentioned already that we've entered a new normal where digital technologies have been more integrated in our lives as we've coped with COVID. So from that respect, I think we have seen an acceleration of digital transformation in perhaps some areas of the economy which had not previously embraced digital technology quite so much. And I think there's been a generational impact too. So certainly in the UK, a lot of the more senior members of our society have been online for the first time, and so they can connect with their families and friends from their home. So in that respect, hopefully digital is maybe less scary to everybody, more ingrained in our lives and much more accessible. So in that respect, I think, potentially it could open up opportunities for us in how we think about working with people and organizations to deliver climate action.
Susan, when we talk about increasing digitalization, we should be cognizant of more than half the developing world's poor who have no access to these tools or to connectivity. What are the ways and means to ensure their inclusion in these solutions, including of the people who are the poor in the world? Anyone in the panel can jump into that question. Can I take it again? Or?
Happy to try that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think that's a key point actually to bring up is, and also it maps to the previous question of, some of the challenges that the pandemic has shown is that the divide in access to different things like healthcare or, the being less resilient to climate change because of the effects of the pandemic have shown. And it's also in the digital divide that has been exacerbated by the pandemic in many ways. And I think this maps, as everything does, to finance, of course, and how we can, fund and find projects that are, exclusively targeted at delivering useful digital technology to people that can actually appreciate it or need it or use it. And that means that building low-cost devices or low-cost capability that someone could install or use, even if it's on their phone or if it's a small device that's, very cheap, that can provide some very useful functionality like give soil moisture or air quality to help you plan some type of activity. Those types of technologies, that require no maintenance, I think are going to be really key to bridging that digital divide and being able to find the finance and motivate those technologies to be deployed is I think really important. So I'm hopeful because that technology is showing up a lot in the research, and I'm excited to see it translate into more practice, especially hopefully after this panel.
Thank you very much, Josiah. One more question, and it's a question from one of our audiences, and it's audience members, and it's Sandra Sanchez from Montreal, and she's asking, how can digital connectivity be improved in the most remote and poorest areas of the world?
Okay, so I guess I'll take that one. I think clearly there has to be significant investments in data infrastructure, especially across the continent. I mean, in some of the countries on the continent here in Africa and other parts of the developing world, the cost of data is just too expensive for people to even have access to. So I think those investments are very critical. Once those investments come in, then we can have private sector operators coming on board. For instance, in a number of countries, we have mobile money transfers, now even outstripping deposits into the traditional banking system. And this has been enabled due to digital technology. So I guess once governments make that needed effort in the investments, we are going to see a significant uptake in the use of the digital solutions. Thank you.
Anthony, perhaps I can also jump in as well. I think there's also an opportunity to leapfrog what some of the kind of previous communication investments that some countries have made. So, for example, satellites could provide a really useful way to increase connectivity without having to dig up vast tracts of land to install fibre. So I think there are, emerging opportunities that can be used around the world to provide that connectivity, regardless of where you're based.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, for that addition. And many thanks to you, our panelists, for today on this session on digital solutions for climate change mitigation, for sharing your experiences and insights. As we reach the end of our discussion today, we have time for one more speaker. I would like to invite Mr. Elliot Harris, the UN Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development and UN Chief Economist, to share with us some concluding notes. Mr. Harris, you have the floor. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, this session brings us to the end of the UN DESA Global Policy Dialogues for Climate Action series, entitled Building a Global Coalition for Sustainability After COVID-19. I'd like to thank our esteemed guests for sharing with us their expertise on climate finance and digital solutions for the climate challenge. I also want to thank our audience for your engagement and insightful questions. With just 4 months to go until COP26, we are still short of reaching the Paris Agreement goal of mobilizing $100 billion per year for climate action in developing countries. The UN Secretary General has stated that it is imperative that we deliver on this promise. While COVID-19 has been devastating for people and economies, we have heard from the panelists here today that there is an opportunity for pandemic recovery efforts and climate action to be mutually supportive. Climate action must help to revive economies, and economic packages designed to overcome the COVID-19 crisis must be green. The failure to do so could lock economies into fossil fuel dependence, putting the achievement of the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals out of reach. Furthermore, we learned today about ways in which digital technologies can help us reduce carbon emissions. For example, smart sensors have the capability to collect, transfer, and analyze a vast amount of data in near real time. When placed in buildings, these sensors can optimize energy distribution, automate building operations, and subsequently improve their overall energy performance. And in areas already affected by climate change consequences, digital technologies can help alleviate risks and damage by delivering essential supplies and improving communications. Ladies and gentlemen, during the past 4 months, in partnership with the whole UN system, these global policy dialogues for climate action have highlighted the multiple ways that climate change is threatening the fragile progress on the SDGs, and have examined the interlinkages between climate change and food, water, energy, transport, forests, oceans, financing, and digital technology. One theme that has come out of all of these discussions is the need for more effective cross-border and cross-sectoral collaboration on each of these issues and at the global, regional, and national levels. We must also improve access to and the transparency of data, as well as simplify access to financing for preparedness initiatives and for projects that move us closer to net zero emissions. My hope is that the insights presented by the experts in this series will serve as valuable inputs to the conversations happening at next week's high-level political forum on sustainable development, and later this year, the high-level forum on energy, the Food Systems Summit, the UN Sustainable Transport Conference, and of course, at COP26. We at UNDESA remain committed to supporting all stakeholders in implementing the shared goals of the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. We will use the upcoming global summits as stages for turning evidence-based knowledge of climate and SDG synergies into actions. As the Secretary General has said, 2021 is the critical year for mobilizing the global coalition for carbon neutrality. Net zero emissions would give us the best chance for delivering all of the promises of the SDGs. Let us all work together to achieve this, and without delay. Thank you. Thank you for your engagement. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your support.
Many thanks, Mr. Harris, for ending our event on such a high note. With that, we've come to the end of our event today. And I just thank you, the speakers and the panelists, for sharing your expertise. And thank you, everyone, for joining in over Zoom and Facebook. Just like to let you know that this event is going to be archived on the UN DESA Facebook page at Join UN DESA. So if you want to watch or share it, you can do it there. You can visit the page, and after this event is finished. For more information on policy dialogue series and the UN DESA is available at un.org/DESA. That's un.org/DESA. Thank you again for your attention, and have a good day and good evening. Thank you.